You are listening to an MLGA Network podcast.
All right, Jessie.
All right, guys.
We're here.
It is a beautiful day here in the Dirty South, and this is your host, Jessie, with the Voluntary Vixens, and my lovely co-host, Maddie, who is not in the Dirty South.
Well, I'm technically in Maryland. We're below the Mason-Dixon line, so certain Yankees up north like to call me a Southerner.
Oh. Yeah, actually,
but, you know,
that happens to me,
they're
too.
bigoted.
A lot of my friends from Mississippi and Alabama and Georgia, they say that Tennessee is the North, which I think is hilarious.
That's funny. Yeah, my sister, when she was down there in Knoxville, she talks a mile a minute, period. And so, but everybody down there was like, that's a northern accent, or that's a northern thing. And it's like, we're from Maryland. We're smack dab in the middle.
Yeah.
But, you know, technicalities are technicalities.
Welcome to Voluntary Vixens, where Jessie and Maddie give a female voice to news and pop culture with a libertarian twist. Join us to stay informed and challenged while keeping it sane, peaceful, and most importantly, voluntary.
Let's see, we're going to just kind of have fun with this episode. This week we kind of got pulled into a book challenge. So we started putting up the books that we felt moved us in this direction towards liberty and voluntarism. Maddie started off with Anatomy of the State, which is probably a pretty appropriate one to start with. Did you want to talk about why you chose that book?
Yeah, well, so last week, our last episode, when we were touching on Memorial Day, we introduced the book because that was the first day of our book challenge. And I mentioned how it kind of related to Memorial Day and just the idea of the war state and the state and how it empowers itself and how it kind of props itself up and continues itself is a lot to do with how it just perpetuates war. And of course, war is the health of the state. To kind of go more in line with what we want to talk about this week, another thing that I pulled from that book, and it's one of those things where I kind of knew already, and then in reading this book, it just like solidified what I was thinking and put it into words in ways that I never, ever could or can. I mean, the way Rothbard can write an essay, holy hell. Goals! Essay goals! But, so, I want to pull this one quote out from a subsection, How the State Preserves Itself, and I think this will kind of set the stage for maybe our opinions on the topic of education and, quote-unquote, the intelligentsia, and people we're supposed to be looking up to, or, you know, people who are supposed to be the experts, who we need to listen, who we need to fall in line behind. Anyway, he talks about how the state apparatus is like a full-time bureaucracy, and so people these days, you might hear them talking about the deep state a lot. But who's propping up the deep state? Who's, quote-unquote, the deep state? It's like the military-industrial complex, but it's also the CIA. And so then we see people like John Brennan, who nationally televised lied to Congress and thus the rest of us about whether or not the government, the NSA, was spying on private citizens. Thank you to all the people that have leaked everything since, and just continues to expose the absolute corruption that we should all know about. Like, we should all sense and feel that there's something wrong, but it just doesn't seem to be there. Anyway, so, like, people like that, think about that when you hear this. And so it's like, the majority must be persuaded by the ideology that their government is good, wise, and at least inevitable, and certainly better than other conceivable alternatives. That's why every time we talk about, like, our libertarian society, our voluntarist society, people, one of the stupidest but first questions asked is, okay, well, how will we build the roads? Because you need a government. You need this stupid, awful, evil state apparatus in Washington, D.C. Those morons who are so far up each other's own you-know-whats but we still want them to be in charge of how we build roads in our neighborhoods. Mm-hmm. Come on, guys. Like, let's break it down a little bit from there. So promoting this idea that we need these people, and at the very least it's inevitable, it's the vital social task of the intellectuals, quote-unquote. For the masses of men do not create their own ideas or indeed think through these ideas independently. They follow passively the ideas adopted and disseminated by the body of intellectuals, or who are otherwise seen as the opinion molders. these people we're supposed to follow and trust and idolize. Mm-hmm. So I thought that's another reason I think this was a good spark and start to our book club discussion. Like, I love reading. I'm such a nerd. I love learning. The thing I miss about school the most is learning. But you know what? And we were talking about this before the episode, and I think you would agree with me, but I've learned so much more from things that I've had to sort of teach myself, and or I go out in search of the information and to gain knowledge for myself for no other reason than I want to know. I want to know the truth. I want to understand. And so I've learned and taught myself so much more since college than I think I ever learned my entire 12 years of actual schooling and then the schooling beyond.
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, one of the other podcasters on our network, Ryan Burgett, he does the Techno Agorist show, and he talks about in one of his episodes about self-education, because
they homeschool like all their 30 kids.
And he was homeschooled, and so he remembers...
Okay, makes sense.
He remembers being homeschooled. His mom gave him some books to choose from, and he would choose which books to read on his own. And then I think at the end, like maybe like in high school, he went back to school, and he was just noticing how different kids thought about education. They were learning, he was like in a chemistry class or some math class, and one of the girls he was studying with was asking him to explain to her how to do a math problem, and he just handed her a book, and she just looked at him blankly, and it just dawned on him,
what's a book?
That's how she was taught to learn, is to just sit back and let people just pour this information onto you, and maybe you might absorb some of it. Whereas he was taught, you're an active participant. Not only that, but you're the only one doing it for you. Nobody else is teaching you. You're teaching yourself. So he probably was baffled by her behavior, because that's how he learned all his life up until that point. So I'm like her. I went to school all my life. So I remember being in college and going to lectures and needing to go to lectures instead of some of the other kids I was in college with that were homeschool kids, and they were like, why are we doing this every day? I could read the book at home. And it took me a while to realize their thought process. And I was like, yeah, I wish I was like that. I wish that from the very beginning of my education that my parents had done that to me, because I probably would have been a better student. Probably would have done a lot better. I didn't learn until later in life how to do all that. So kudos to him for doing that with his kids. I'm hoping I can pass that on to my kids too.
No, I'm definitely thinking about that all the time, even though I'm unmarried and have no kids. But the kids I want to have, I want them to be able to think critically and think freely and be able to come up with answers on their own. I mean, I'm going to be there for them every step of the way, answering their questions or probably giving them questions right back, like trying to help them figure things out. Because I think growing up, I was fortunate enough, like we went to, I think a Montessori school really helped. My brother, sister, and I were all kind of a little bit different in terms of what most popular opinions are. We've all each got our own thing, and then even amongst ourselves, we've got our differences, but we kind of reason through them, and so we respect the other's opinion and whatnot. Like, oh, we respect a differing opinion. Imagine that.
Oh God, I know.
So I think it taught us just that there are different paths and different ways to approach things, and like kind of we're inadvertently taught how to figure things out for ourselves. And on top of that, I was absolutely just so lucky to have more or less 3 sets of grandparents around me all the time. And so I love old people. I think that's because I've had old people around me all the time, and they were always like the kind of people that celebrated my curiosity. And my grandfather, I still have in my baby books, like photo albums, like he would get so impressed and so delighted with my new words that he would jot down all the new words I was saying that day. Aww. And he would just like update my parents when they both got home from work, because like we were all very lucky that a lot of our early childcare was while we went to schooling of some sort. We had mostly like our grandparents to fall back on, so it was just like it was a never-ending journey of actual education, I think. And then, then came schooling, which I think you'd agree, and people like Ryan would agree, that schooling does not necessarily equal education.
Yeah. It means that you know how to regurgitate information back to people is what it means now.
Do you mean like following orders?
Yeah, sort of like that. I mean, you wrote a really good thing on your when you posted the last book about how you just figure out what your English teachers wants to hear and you write your little book report based off of that. It took me a long time to figure that out. I was probably best at English and literature and stuff like that. That was probably where I was the best at in school. But when it came to book reports and things like that, I always struggled because I would talk about what I was interested in and not...
Oh, no. And, God forbid.
Yeah, and I wouldn't put into the book like what the teacher had just said that she got out of it. Because I remember reading The Crucible, and this is a very telling thing because I wrote a book report. I transferred schools. So the school I went to before was Head. It was a private school, so it was a Head. And we read The Crucible, and I wrote a book report and made an A+ on it. The teacher was like, I want you to read this book report in front of the class. It's the best book report I've ever seen. And then I have to read The Crucible again for the next year class. For some reason, they waited a year later to read The Crucible at that school. So I told the teacher, I'm like, I've already read the book and I've already written a report on it. Can I read something else? No, you have to read this book again and write a report about this again.
One size fits all.
So I was like, okay, F that, not reading this book again, because first off, I hate The Crucible. I think it's a dumb book. I'm sorry.
I'm going to be ignorant for a minute. I don't even know what that book is.
It's basically...
Am I missing out or am I okay?
You're not.
I'm okay with that.
You're not.
That sigh tells me I'm okay with that.
It's basically about the Salem witch trial. And
well,
I was never...
Considering the sage I've got burning next to me and the essential oils downstairs that I always brew and play with, like, I would have been burned at the Salem witch trials. Me and my heretical opinions.
I guess I just really didn't like it. And so I had to read it again, and I wrote a book report I didn't read it again. What am I saying? I was like, screw that. I'm not going to read this book again. I already have a book report written. I'm just going to recycle it.
Did you mention what grade was this?
This was...
You said you transferred, you were ahead, and it kind of went back.
This was junior year. Yeah, I read it in 10th grade, and then I went to a public school for my junior and senior year. And, yeah. So, anyways...
Contrarian you.
Yeah. She didn't like the book report that I had written and made an A+ on for my other teacher. And I realized at that point that English teachers are arbitrary, and it's kind of a joke. I mean, I don't know, just teaching English literature, you're basically not learning anything, in my opinion, in school on English literature. You're basically learning what your teacher thinks is cool about it, and you just have to, like, regurgitate back to them what they want you to get out of it, instead of what you actually get out of it. Because, let's face it, not everybody has nobody can sit in a room and even agree on their favorite music. Why would you think that you're going to have a classroom full of kids excited about this book that you picked out? You're not.
Yeah.
And most of the time, the books that they make you read for school, I mean, they're not really high caliber books, in my opinion. I don't know. That's been my experience.
It kind of depends, and then so, like, things have changed over the years, even, like, while I was in school, or, even the bit of high school for 4 years. I do want to give them the benefit of the doubt. Like, I know there are good teachers out there. I know there are good English teachers out there. I know, like, okay, so maybe the first episode, I dished a little hate to the English majors of the world. But, my cousin's an English major, and I love having, like, actual debates with him on different books and different ideas, and we talk about things all the time. And one of my very good friends, Diana, like, she's also an English major, and she's totally gone down her own kind of self-discovery and intellectual journey, and is now in her dream job. Not dissing all you. don't want to collectivize everybody into a category where I think you're lesser or anything. But anyway.
No.
You know, so sometimes it's not necessarily the teachers that choose the books. It's sometimes what they're forced to do. So that just goes into, like, this state-controlled, top-down educational approach versus, like, the teachers having more autonomy. And so, you know, that can go both ways. Some teachers really do suck and probably have tenure and can do whatever they want and dish out bad opinions and terrible book choices. You know, then there's other ones that really do try. But, like, to what you were saying, it's like, everybody, it should be about how you approach the book and, like, what you get out of it and what you're able to state and explain and reason to why you thought those things from that book, like, versus you're supposed to think this about that book.
Yeah.
And so,
yeah,
a lot of the, and so just like if you go to Instagram, you can check out our entire collection of books from this Liberty Book Club, hashtag Liberty Book Club we did this week. Like I said, we started with Anatomy of the State, and we just posted our last one today, right? Is that today?
Yeah.
I'm in a weird time warp. Those were all books that we chose to read of our own accord.
Yeah.
The exception, the weird, like, slight semi-exception is the book I posted today was Animal Farm. And so, like, I did get assigned to read that in 8th grade, but I of course, didn't read it, like, when I was supposed to.
Yeah.
I went back and read it later. I watched the movie and laughed my butt off when, was it, who's the first pig that dies? I can't remember. Oh, never mind. You haven't read it yet. Okay.
Yeah, don't.
Spoiler alert? Well, it's not a spoiler alert because it's literally just like a parody, almost an animal form of the Russian or the Soviet Revolution.
Yeah.
So, you know.
It's definitely on my list.
First? Yeah.
I read
the movie's pretty comical.
I read 1984 of George Orwell's, which that was actually, I found that interesting because that was a required reading for our seniors at my private school, but it was not a required reading for public school, which I find that to be interesting today because I'm thinking, well, why would the public school system not want us to read 1984? Oh, okay. Now that I've read it, yeah, I see why, which is just interesting to me. I mean, I think that should be a required reading for everybody. That and Fahrenheit 451 by, who was it? God, I just blanked on.
Ray Bradbury.
Yeah, Ray Bradbury. That's another one that I think everybody needs to read because we are literally...
Side note
in
on
those
Ray
times.
Bradbury, Fahrenheit 451. Do not settle with just watching that HBO movie. It did not do it justice. I gave it my best effort. Did you see that by chance?
The one I saw was like from 1960s something.
The old school one. No,
yeah.
So the HBO did a revamp. Because what's ironic about that and the 1984, so I did recently, for the first time, read 1984 myself. Because again, I think it may have been assigned to some of the other classes in school, but not to make me seem smarter than I am. Like, I was always in the honors classes or the higher level classes, which I think is also funny. Like, don't give the smart kids the books that are going to make them really think. Give them to the kids that, you know, maybe not be as gifted and probably definitely won't read that book. I think that's a little thing we could go on a tangent about too. Conspiracy mood. Yeah. So it's just interesting that we're in this time where we actually kind of are living that fictional world, that dystopian-like era that we're actually almost a part of. But it's, and then also, like, I'll put on I don't know if we've talked about it before, but I also read The Handmaid's Tale. Handmaid's Tale?
Yeah.
So it's like these people, like the mainstream media, just like mainstream blogosphere, they're talking about how we're living in 1984 and like we're living in The Handmaid's Tale.
Yeah.
And like and it's just like, where have you been? And why is it only like the Trump presidency, like, in him himself, that makes you think we're in that? It's like, where have you been? You're late to the party, and then you're still not even aware of who actually is at the party with you, and like what the actual theme of the party is. Like, check yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I am hesitant to say that Trump is even part of that because he's so just a mess. He's not put together enough for it to even be, I'm sorry, for that to even be believable.
I wish he was. All right. No, I don't wish he was more authoritarian than he is.
I'm actually...
Don't read into that way.
that I've talked about this with some friends, with even my grandmother, because my grandmother hates him and thinks he's just not presidential. I'm like, I'm glad he's not, because what I think of presidential as someone who's fake. So, I don't want that. I don't want someone who's going to lie to me. I don't want somebody who's going to tell me what I want to hear all the time. I
don't want a prefabricated politician.
Yeah, and I would almost say...
There's nothing scarier.
Yeah, I would definitely say that if we're going to... In my lifetime, because I'm older than Maddie, in my lifetime, I would say that it's always kind of been that way, 1984-ish. I think that during the Bush administration is when it really kicked off and became real to me that this is what's happening.
And it had to be.
Yeah.
Because it went to... the state wanted to go to war.
Yeah.
It had to lie its way and confund the public to think that they wanted to go to war. Everybody in Congress...
And that's basically what was going on in the book.
Exactly.
They were always in war.
War is peace. War is peace. Yeah. And then, if anybody hasn't read that book yet, please do. It's, really short. You'll get through it pretty quickly. It's kind of weird in certain ways, but whatever. Have at it. Just look at it, especially in the way that they seem to keep conveniently changing history when they need it to. Or they, and that's the main character's whole job, like to actually go back and edit history, edit newspapers, edit journal articles, edit TV segments, unperson somebody, get rid of somebody, make somebody, go back in time and make somebody the enemy who all of a sudden is out of the state's favor. Tell me that's not happening. Tell me that's not something that's been happening for decades.
Yeah.
But and so I think the Bush era, and honestly, it was probably happening because everybody thought Clinton was cool. Clinton was not cool.
Yeah.
Definitely even before that. I would even venture to say that it might have really gone into hyperdrive with, the killing or the assassination of JFK.
Yeah. I wouldn't be surprised by that at all.
I'm not gonna doubt that there's some kind of connection.
George Orwell probably had no idea that he was basically writing a manual to people on how to manipulate a large group of people, because that's exactly what's going on. You could even say that maybe that was what was going on before then, because I would even say that it started happening after World War I in our country.
Our involvement or our introduction into World War II required a lot of propaganda, a lot of lies and manipulation, and relying on the emotion of the people and toying with them to get us involved and to send our boys to... people were still being conscripted to just round up our boys and send them overseas to fight in a war that they were told that they had to go do. And if you listen to Thaddeus Russell on the topic, he's my favorite person to disagree with. But in one area, he really is. He makes me think, and he makes me so angry sometimes. But you know what? I become stronger and a better thinker because of him. But anyway, so if you've never listened to Thaddeus Russell, check out his unregistered podcast. I really do want to read his book, Renegades, or Renegade History, and basically how the people you want to think are not good people or scoundrels or mongrels, or they might not be normally favored in the public, but they're the ones that actually quote unquote wrote history and are the history that we see. But we're not told about or taught about, or not taught about favorably, I should say.
Well, I think that's true, yeah.
He talks about how they made World War II a race issue, and that was one, how it made people support it more strongly back then, but also how it's kind of mythologized it to this day. It's a completely different memory of World War II than what was actually happening in World War II.
What started it, yeah, and what fueled it.
And another thing I'll say about Thaddeus Russell, and then I'll get off the topic of him, but it connects to what I was talking about from Rothbard's Anatomy of the State, is that he always points out that it's the intellectuals that get us into these wars. It's these opinion molders, these people in academia, these experts, these people that we're supposed to look up to and trust. Those are the people that result in us getting sent to war. Mm-hmm. So be careful who you listen to.
Yeah,
as I've said before.
Well, first off, never think that what you're being told on the news is 100% true.
You can't.
I literally had I was talking to somebody the other day about, we were talking about Alex Jones. And I'm not saying on here that I'm a huge fan of Alex Jones or anything. But she was saying that Alex Jones is just a liar. And basically just that he just makes up stuff. And that's why he should be deplatformed, because he makes up stuff and he incites violence. And she was citing the whole situation with the kids in Connecticut.
Sandy Hook.
Yeah, the Sandy Hook thing. And I was like, well, why don't you listen to the latest podcast he was on with Joe Rogan, because he really talks about that in detail. It's a 4-hour-long podcast. So
It was like 5 hours. And I did listen to every minute of that.
He was literally grilled on that topic because that was one of Joe Rogan's biggest issues. And he talks about how he got that wrong. He apologized for that. And he even went back and tried to make a statement on his show about do not retaliate on these people, do not commit violence towards these people. And I think it was some crazy chick that confronted a family, and I think she was literally crazy. Like, she ended up having to go to the hospital because of it. You know, that was one of the things that I was trying to make a point, is that, like, that's what the media does, is they say these people are crazy, these people are saying violent things, we need to shut them down because they might incite more violence.
They're dangerous.
Meanwhile, we have Antifa literally hitting people in the face with bike locks and calling people Nazis and punching people who they disagree with, pouring pee on people's faces.
Urine.
Yeah.
Throwing feces like they're
That
animals.
is not inciting violence. I mean,
I'd say that's disgusting.
it's a little bit double-sided or one-sided. I mean, I just don't get that. How you can demonize somebody where there was one instance of violence and not demonize your side, which has multiple instances of violence. And it's all coming from the mainstream media. And you have people saying, by all means necessary, punch a Nazi. And nowadays the definition of Nazi is so all over the place. I mean, it encompasses so many different people.
Insert meme.
Yeah.
Everyone who I don't like is a Nazi.
Yeah, so I mean, you're justifying punching anybody that you disagree with, essentially. I know my friend is going to listen to this and we're going to have a long text conversation about that, but
we still love you, friend.
yes, I mean, she's obviously...
I don't know who you are, but
she's obviously an
here.
intelligent person because she's my friend. So, I mean, that's just one thing we disagree on, I think, but we agree on almost everything
quick,
else.
Though, like, so before we lose the whole Alex Jones thing, he's held to a higher standard of truth, it seems, than people like Hillary Rodham Clinton, Colin Powell, John Bolton, all the people that and James Brennan,
yep,
Clapper, all these people that Comey, freaking Mueller, like, not Mueller today, Mueller that went along with going to get us into Iraq.
Jussie Smollett, Kamala Harris.
Jussie's... Oh my god. Like, why are these people able to not be or get away with not being truthful, and when it's the ramifications of their untruths, their lies, their quote-unquote mistakes or misreading of information have led to the deaths of millions of people over decades of warfare. And it's like everybody wants to rag on Alex Jones for getting something wrong and apologizing profusely for it about a school shooting.
Yes.
As unfortunate and as tragic as any school shooting is.
Everybody wants to talk about that chick that got run over in Charlottesville. Well, she was protesting against the quote-unquote Nazis, which I guess, no, I shouldn't say quote-unquote, because there were literal Nazis in that.
It sounds like there were some Nazis.
And white supremacists and all that. But...
And I'll say losers.
Yeah.
Losers! If you're a Nazi, like an actual Nazi, like an actual white supremacist these days, like, you're a loser. There are countless better ideas, and your guys' ideas were proven wrong. Get over yourself.
Yeah, why didn't you just leave him alone? Like, that's what I don't understand. These guys, nobody... I mean, I guess maybe back then, you know...
There's like 6.
Yeah.
There might be 6 actual Nazis in the entire United States. There's not that many. And everybody hates them.
What was it? Back in 2016, it was, you know, still like a new thing. We were surprised that there were even still white supremacists, so...
It's like, where were you guys?
I know. Like, why are you guys showing up now?
Glad all 8 of you have made yourselves known. Way to go.
Yeah, and I think that explains why people were protesting it at that time. But now it's like, okay, You guys really shouldn't be afraid of these people. There's like 6 of them. The majority of the people on the right don't identify as white nationalists or Nazis, and we hate these people. So, let's move on. And there's actually a protest, I think it was this week, where in downtown Knoxville, where I'm from, and there was a white supremacist group down there that were marching. I think there was I don't even know, 6 people there. And there were so many more protesters against them than there were actually protesters that were like, yay, white people, we want to take over the world. Good luck with that.
Right.
Or actually take over America, I guess. And actually, they I don't know why they protest, because nobody agrees with them. And if nobody showed up to these protests, then they would just disappear back into obscurity. But we keep giving these people attention.
Yeah, we are propping them up by giving them attention and giving them importance where there isn't any, and that they don't have any. People made Richard Spencer popular.
Exactly.
And that guy, has no friends.
That is why Alex Jones is such a big deal. Because you guys made him into such a big deal. That's why Milo Yiannopoulos is such a big deal.
I might have something to counter there with you. Alex Jones and Milo in particular, they made their own popularity. And so thus they're more dangerous. Richard Spencer, on the other hand, I think is manufactured popularity. And so he's still allowed on Twitter.
Yeah, I don't get that.
I mean, but there's always some kind of reasoning. I think I'm always looking for the sleight of hand, or why is this the shiny object that they're showing? What are they not showing us? Speaking of shiny objects, and just something I'll drop here is the whole time we were having that abortion debate in this country, they were ramping things up to go invade or interfere in Venezuela. They were getting everybody hot and heavy and way over energized about war with Iran. Whenever you see some dumb internal debate that really we shouldn't even be having, at least on a national level, keep it with your states and your communities and figure out the best thing that works for your people, and then figure out the best thing that works for yourself and get the hell out of that state if you disagree. We're trying to all evolve to a better state, but we're not going to do so on a 300 plus million level nationally. Anyway, always think about what is going on behind the scenes. If you're getting waved and dangled this carrot in front of you, what is behind your back?
And that's a big thing that a lot of the books that we're talking about talk about, these types of societies, these governments that they dangle in front of you. Here's what's important. You should focus on this. Meanwhile, they're starting wars and they're doing things behind the scenes that if you had known about it, you probably would disagree with it. But they do that to distract you.
And demoralize you. And desensitize you.
Our media focus so much on trying to argue the abortion debate, which we could get, that's just a whole different episode we could even go into, and I've already talked about it a little bit. So yeah.
Check out episode
I don't really want
5.
to do it again. Yeah. It all comes down to knowing your history. The United States of America is called the United States because we are separate states that are united together, and we allow each state to have their own laws, their own rights within a certain means. So it is constitutional for Alabama to have stricter laws against abortion than California. That's okay, because you as an American citizen have the right to move to California if you want to have your abortion. Or if you don't like living in California because you don't like their laws there, you can move to Alabama or move to Texas or move to wherever. That's the beauty of...
so many people are moving from California to Texas and then changing Texas into what California is or was.
Yeah.
That's another
yeah, I know some
podcast.
People that we could probably even we could interview and they could take over for us on that episode.
Yeah, right.
But I think that's the beauty of our nation, is that we allow people that individual freedom. If we lose that, then we become like 1984, where we have to have somebody convincing the masses of what they're supposed to believe, because it's not a natural thing for people to all agree on the same thing. That will never happen naturally. We will always be individuals.
I'm totally drawing a blank on, what's the name of the country? Like, it's supposed to be in 1984.
Oceania or something like that.
I think that's one of the countries that it's always at war with, but I guess it's like whatever Europe is in that dystopian future, but it collectivizes the world into like 3 countries or 4 countries at times, given whoever is winning the war, not winning the war, but
yeah,
fabricated nonsense.
But another book that I was thinking of, you know, kind of like Animal Farm and Anatomy of the State, that kind of it's a novel, so it's actually a story. Mm-hmm. Well, so is Animal Farm, I guess, but I really suggest to a lot of my friends who are leaning towards socialism or communism as an idea for our government to read Germinal, because it really goes into detail how groupthink can lead to disastrous things. And one of the characters in the novel is a Russian who is a Marxist. It goes into detail in the story about how that ideology starts to just decay everything. It ends up disastrously for the main characters and for the people that they demonized as having all the wealth and having all the control. You realize you have to kind of read through the whole story till you get to that point, but you realize that they weren't as the evil people that you thought they were. They were just people like everybody else who had kids, that had a house, who had a life, who had ideas for the future, just like everybody else did. And it probably could have turned into a different scenario if everybody would have not thought so negatively of the other. You know, it's kind of like when all you do is just think about the other person as this evil person, and then you finally reach them and you're just a complete butt face to them. What do you expect to get in return? So you have to think about that. I've talked about this on the abortion debate. If you really want to get people on your side, you have to be nice to them first. They have to know that you're not trying to do mean and evil things to them. So Germinal really illustrates that.
I think that raises a good and important point, and which I think is a good overarching theme and just truth that we're experiencing and forced to put up with. And it'll be sort of our own decision, our own choices that will help us get over a lot of the propaganda that's sent our way and spewed at us, that those who disagree with us or have different opinions are evil. And, okay, sometimes they actually are evil. Like, people who are pro-murder, pro-warfare state, like, I'm going to think you're evil. But I'm also going to probably give you the benefit of the doubt that you've been lied to, and you have accepted that lie, and I forgive you for that. And I know Jesus does, too. And we can get past these things if we're willing to keep the idea that we are humans and we are here together. And it's not about, like, something that I think about all the time, and so we've definitely got our criticisms, and I think we talked about them with Reagan, but it's a quote, I guess it's attributed to him, but he was talking about how the conflict isn't between right and left, or like us, amongst ourselves, amongst the people. It's about those that are governing and those that are being governed.
Yep.
And I think that highlights, and that kind of is an overarching theme amongst all the both fiction and nonfiction books that we brought up in our Liberty Book Club this week, things that we've since put ourselves, you and I, Jessie, deciding to educate ourselves, trying to stay informed, trying to keep our brains moving and activated.
Yep.
Because when it comes down to it, we can't rely on other people to tell us the truth. We can't rely on them to teach us what's actually important. It's important to keep your mind open and listen to everything. Take in information is free.
Be aware of your own bias. I think that's the big thing. It's like, be aware of your own bias. Know that you have these biases, so sometimes I have to do that to myself. I'll realize that all I've been listening to are podcasts that just support my opinion on everything. Sometimes I need to get outside of that. I'll listen to some of the podcasts that my friends who are not libertarians, will suggest to me. So that means I'm listening to Ben Shapiro sometimes. Sometimes I'm listening to more liberal type podcasts. Like I've been listening to, what is it? Something about bastards. Like, I want to say Battle of the Bastards, but that's not it, because that's a totally different thing.
That sounds Game of Thrones-ish. right?
Yeah, it is Game of Thrones. But this one is about the history of like the just bad people, and these two guys are comedians. They're obviously leftists, and they talk about different people throughout history that did bad things. Another thing that I was going to say, since you brought up that quote, it reminded me of an Alexander Solzhenitsyn quote, which I think is pretty telling about the way that his books are written. I suggest reading Cancer Ward because that's what I put in my book club thing. But this quote it says, "The battle line between good and evil runs through the heart of every man." So if you're looking at your arch enemy, for example, and you're thinking, that guy is the embodiment of evil, I hate that person, I want him shut down, I don't want to, like maybe it's Alex Jones, I want him off the internet, I don't want to hear anything he has to say, you need to also take a good look at yourself in the mirror, because potential for evil is in every single one of us. We all have thoughts like that every day, that we want to do something to somebody else, that we want to hurt somebody else, we want to shut somebody down. It comes from inside of all of us. It's something that's not unique. Some of us are better at pushing that person down than others. So you're not, the big key is humility. You do not have the right to judge other people because you're just as bad, you're just as good, you're just as whatever as the other person is.
Because you're human.
Yeah, that's why I think it's okay for Trump to talk to Kim Jong-un and Vladimir Putin, because we need to give them a chance to speak their mind to our leaders. We need to give them an ear, and they'll give us an ear. You have to give them a chance.
Yeah, because if they're as dangerous as everybody says they are, and they very well could be, because everybody has that capacity, and history has shown us that people have done awful things to each other, to their citizens, to other countries, innocent citizens of other countries. It's just like Slaughterhouse 5, bombing of Dresden.
Yeah,
but
that was us. That was us.
That was us.
We killed innocent women and children during World War II. Imagine that.
Imagine that. But we were the noble people, the good guys, right? But anyway, I guess one last thing that's something that you made me think of, and I suggest, it wasn't in our book club, but I do highly recommend it. Like, people have their criticism stuff, and one book that really changed my life, and especially my 2018, and is one of the guiding resources. Cam's gonna like totally roll his eyes, but Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life, because like in particular to what you were just saying, Rule 6, clean up your own house and clean up your own room became the meme, but it's basically like fix your own life, fix your own problems before you go criticize the world. And so before you go demonize the other person for thinking differently, make sure your blind spots are sorted out, make sure they're cleaned up. And I really do try to do so.
Yeah, that's a voluntarist viewpoint.
It is. If everybody's got their own clean room, I think we're all going to get along and respect each other a lot more, because there's something therapeutic about it as well.
It starts with the individual. It always starts with the individual, people. Like, that's why communism and socialism cannot function, because there are no individuals. You completely disassociate the individual from the equation. It always starts with you. At the very simplest thing that you can even do is change yourself first. Get yourself in order first. That's what it always comes down to. If you're not a Christian, you can talk about any novel will talk about this. I mean, that's what it comes down to in Germinal. That's what it comes down to in Cancer Ward. That's what it comes down to in every Ayn Rand book that I've ever read.
We the Living. Everybody should read We the Living too. Everybody only knows Ayn Rand for Atlas Shrugged. Wow. It's
universal. It's only a recent, 20th century concept that we think about the collective. Or in countries where, let's just face it, they're not as progressed as we are in human rights. That's just what I was just going to say. It was my little rant, was just, we have to think about what we need to do, what we have control over, which is ourselves. And if we want the world to be a better place, we have to be a better person.
And with a classic Gandhi paraphrase, be the change you want to see in the world. It's true. It has to start with you.
Yep.
Well, anyways, this has been fun. I love talking about books. Like I said, I'm a huge nerd, and so like thinking about thinking and talking about talking, and especially like when I can rail against the war state, like that's some of my favorite things to do. So thanks for spending another morning with me, Jessie.
No problem. I love it.
As we mentioned and alluded to a few times in the show here today, you can find us on Instagram, Voluntary Vixens. We're on Twitter at Vixens Voluntary. You know, go figure.
And we are blowing up on Instagram. Instagram loves us.
Oh, Instagram. Instagram loves us. I love Instagram. Like, I'm about it. That's because memes are life.
And we have a Patreon now, too.
We do have a Patreon.
That I still have to get... I'm thinking about putting some of our stuff on there just so that you can find us. But it's at... The V's are capitalized voluntary... Or no, sorry. Vixen _ voluntary 01. Patreon.com. So...
We could put that in the show notes for you because that sounds complicated.
Yeah, it is complicated because somebody already took voluntary vixens from us. So
how dare they?
I know.
Well, anyways, happy day. Keep it sane, keep it peaceful, and keep it voluntary, our people.
Keep it voluntary. Bye, folks.
Peace out.